Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Lurkin from Mobalytics, and I'm showcasing a Arc Lash Paingorger's build that absolutely shreds. And Duriel's dead. This isn't going to be as good as like those Blizzard nuke builds in the 4-man scaling, but as you can see, it passes the case. It nuked Duriel, so it'll nuke Uber Lilith, and it's going to shred in dungeons. So this is Arc Lash Slasher 2.0 Ancient Flame, variant 9000 4.0. So this is the second iteration of Arc Lash Slasher. There's a lot of stuff about Paingorgers that we didn't know, or that I didn't know until there was a Reddit post, and then I did some testing on the training dummies to try and amp up the damage. And so this whole build is about scaling the Paingorger damage while also still trying to retain good single target, because that's one of Arc Lash's. It's not one of Arc Lash's strengths. So I'm going to go over Paingorgers real quick, and then I'm going to talk briefly about exactly how to scale Paingorgers and where it comes from. Because it doesn't scale like normal things. It scales weirdly like how people scale the pet. So, Paingorgers damage enemies with a non-basic skill. Marks them for 3 seconds. They get a little aura above their head. And then when you hit an enemy, all the enemies that are marked, the damage gets echoed. The echo cannot crit. It cannot overpower. And it scales weirdly. So what it does scale off of is this right here in the tooltip. This number, this 40,844 to 49,920. It can be increased. This number won't increase, but your damage to the Paingorger will increase with stuff like Storm Swell or Conceited, other multiplicative glyphs and whatnot. I'll go over that when I go over the Paragon. But the whole point of this build was trying to buff the living shit out of this right here, this Arc Lash damage. I tried in Bieber for a little bit. I ended up getting more value out of Charged. And then I ended up being able to get some points back and put it somewhere else. So in Beaver was the first try, and so Selig would be an option for this if you really want to be unkillable. Your damage is going to go down, but Selig is an option because of that plus 100% damage to healthy. So we're going to go over the enchantments. So one thing about Paingorgers, I have a list, and the link in the description will be the Mobalytics link of the 2.0 build. It's going to replace the first one on the tier list soon. So the thing about Paingorgers is I have a little list, and it shows you exactly what procs the Echo and what doesn't for Sorcerer. Two things that do proc it are Firebolt Enchant and Iceblade's Enchant, and then Iceblade's on this any hard-casted skill on the skill bar, like Iceblades or Lightning Spear or Chain Lightning. But so Teleport, Raiment, Stun Teleports will proc it, and then when you use Unstable Currents, unfortunately, the stuff that spawns out of it is not going to proc Echoes, but it's going to ramp you up through Conjuration Mastery, so that's how we're going to scale. So we have Firebolt Enchant to apply Burning for Devouring Blaze for DR Burning if you choose to take that. And every time Firebolt Enchant ticks, for whatever reason, it reprocs the Paingorger's mark. So it just keeps applying and applying. So anything that you hit with through this method, anything that you hit with Unstable Currents will become Burning and then thus is marked. I think Firebolt Enchant is the crux of this build. The second enchant becomes a little flexible. There's a few ways to run this, but this one runs Asu's Ferocity and Ancient Flame for even more attack speed. And so to make up for it, and also to scale Conjuration Mastery, we slot in Iceblade's Enchant, because that'll reduce all our cooldowns. Real quick, there's two ways to run it. So I only use Tibalts when I'm bossing. There's two ways to run it. You can run it with Asu's Boots, which I prefer for stuff like Hell Tides or Overworld or bossing, or like dungeons that aren't particularly dense. Asu's is good. And then I've structured the build in a way for seamless transition into Flickersteps. Both of them work, and the way we accomplish the seamless transition is by having movement speed on the necklace. That way you don't just have 125% movement speed when you're running flickers. You're still at 150, and it feels better because flickers feel a little slow. So let's go into the skill tree. I'm going to take off Shaco so you can see where I have the points. So we'll have to fix this real quick. We'll just take 1 point out of Teleport for now. So you're going to have 1 point, if you don't have Shaco, you're going to have 1 point in Firebolt, just for the enchantment. Then you're going to max out Arc Lash, and then you're going to have Enhanced Arc Lash, and Glinting Arc Lash so that it reduces your cooldowns even more when you hit stunned enemies. You got a lot of lightning spears going out, especially during unstable currents, and just the cast of the bar, so that it helps reduce cooldowns. It sort of lets us not run overflowing and still get away with it. I don't find UC too necessary in this build, so I'm not that upset with not having permanent uptime when I have Asus on. Some people are really about permanent uptime about UC, so if that's you, run Flickersteps. So next we take 3 points in charge bolts. The reason I do this is because in some dungeons, sometimes, especially if I'm running Flickersteps, because Flickersteps eliminate the need for the cooldown reduction from Iceblades because I'm getting all the cooldown reduction off my unstable currents. So what I'll do is I'll take Charge Bolt Enchant and I'll just shove it right here. And it makes for really good mobbing from the Raymond stun, from everything. And then Destructive Charge Bolts, they take 20. It's a really good form of DR. You take 25% less damage from them. And during unstable currents, Charge Bolts are coming out. So we'll put Ice Blades back. We'll show Charge Bolts later. I'm going to do a dungeon with Asus. I'm going to do a normal Nightmare dungeon with Asus, and then a vault with Flickers, because that's where it really shines. We just take the 3 points in Flame Shield to get to Shimmering and Enhanced for movement speed and for life regen. 4 points in Teleport. You could take a point out somewhere else if you want to max this out. Shimmering and Enhanced. Max out Glass Cannon with Raiment. 1 rank in Elemental Attunement. And then we just take the bare minimum in Ice Blades. Enhanced Ice Blades reduces... Ice Blades, the cooldown itself gets reduced by 0.5 seconds every time it hits a vulnerable enemy. Summon Ice Blades, 20% of that reduced cooldown goes to all your other skills. So that's sort of the feedback loop. Then we take Lightning Spear, we take Enhance so that it crits more, and then every time it crits it becomes vulnerable, and it also stuns. So next is the main scaler of the build, is Conjuration Mastery. So 6% damage for each active Conjuration out. And I could go over to Kyovashad. We'll just do it in the dungeon, but you can test it in the training dummies in Kyovashad. You'll get a ton out, like 10, 12 during unstable currents, especially against multiple training dummies. So this ends up being really nice because this damage, every time you have a Conjuration out, it's going to increase your Arc Lash damage here by the percentage that you have from the Conjuration Mastery. So that will scale up. And that's why we don't take Devouring Blaze on the Amulet, because Dev Blaze doesn't scale this number up. And Dev Blaze only scales up because the Paingorger cannot crit. The Dev Blaze won't apply on the Paingorger proc. So that's why we don't take it on the Amulet. We just take the 3 to help a single target. We can't take Mana Shield because we're not spending mana. 1 rank Align the Elements, and 3 ranks in Protection for that Fat Barrier. As I said, 3 ranks in Devouring Blaze to help a single target. We just take the bare minimum in Ball Lightning. I'm really just using it to make Crackling because I have Charged in the build. So you're really only... This build doesn't, even with Static Discharge right here, this build doesn't make a ton of Crackling. It can be a little bit of an issue sometimes, but when you're bossing, the Ball Lightnings are going to hit the boss and make Crackling, and then you're going to get that 15% there, and that's when you actually need it. But like going through the dungeon itself all the time, you're not always going to have the Crackling around. And Crackling energy also, when it ticks off you and it hits something, it procs the Paingorger's Mark. So that's nice. We max out Unstable Currents, and then we take Supreme. So we take Prime for the attack speed, and then we take Supreme. That way you can hold on to your Crackling energy for a while once it actually makes it for more ticks. We take 3 ranks in Electrocution, so that enemies deal 15% less damage to us for 5 seconds. And then Conduction is a little bit of a flex. I take this because when I use Flickers, I want that little bit of more movement speed, and it also adds crit to Asus, so it's not bad. You could take these 3 points out of the movement speed. You can put them in Icy Veil to have 15% more barriers, or you could put 1 in Teleport and then max out and then put some points in Flame Shield so it lasts a little longer. And then lastly, our key passive, which is the theme of the season, is the Bugged Asus Ferocity. So normally it's just fire critical strike damage to increase that gets increased by 25% against enemies above half-life, below half-life, 5% crit chance. It's working with everything. I still think even if they fix this, it'd still have a place in the build purely for the attack speed because it goes on the Amulet. That's 75% attack speed. That's pretty crazy. And even if Asus Ferocity, the damage gets fixed, it will still work with the Ancient Flame aspect that gives you attack speed, because the only threshold that you need to proc Ancient Flame is a critical strike that kills an enemy or hits a boss. To be determined whether I want Ancient Flame or Rapid on the amulet, because sometimes when you're dungeoning, the Paingorger's Mark will kill enemies, so you don't have the best uptime on Asus Ferocity, but when you're bossing, that's when it really matters, and this is what's taken to make up for the lack of single target, is the Asus Ferocity, because it lets you smash the shit out of the boss. It does a lot. Let's go into our Seneschal Pet. So I gotta fix this one. So breaking and efficiency was the setup for bosses. I'll put that back in so you can look at it for a second. Breaking, can never find these, and efficiency. So for when you're bossing, you always want Evernight, and then you want breaking to ensure the boss is vulnerable, and you want efficiency for more crit chance. And then I would say when you're mobbing, we're gonna get rid of efficiency, and we're gonna take arcing. We're going to take arcing. Now say you have Flickersteps on, you're going to have a ton of lightning spears out. So what you could do is you could drop arcing and breaking, and you could take arcing and efficiency so that you can make up some of that crit chance. So that's what I would do. So next is Flash of Adrenaline. If you don't have Genesis, you can run Initiative or Safeguard. So what Tactical and Duration do together is Tactical reduces the cooldown of the skill from 20 to 12 seconds. Duration increases it from 8 to 12, so that we normally get a 20% damage buff, like permanently, because it's 12 and 12. And then with Genesis, that makes it 150%. So that's really nice. And if you take Initiative, then he'll teleport to you just to guarantee that the 20%'s up all the time. And if you take Safeguard, you'll have 7 seconds worth of 15% DR every 12 seconds. Let's move into our Paragon board. It ended up looking a little different. I was trying to take as much as I could to max the Paingorger stuff. So for the Paragon, we just start off, path through the non-fizz. We take Reinforced, because Reinforced is a really good glyph. 15% DR when you have a barrier. Sorcerer always has a barrier. Buffs are non-fizz. Buffs are all resist. Then next we take Elementalist. Elementalist is really good on this build because you have 3 sources of things that are hitting enemies a lot. Elementalist is a per enemy glyph. Part of my issue with it on some builds. So dealing fire, cold, or lightning damage increases all damage dealt to them by 5% for 10 seconds. This isn't like a self buff to you. This is a debuff to enemies, to where when you hit them, you have Firebolt enchant, you have your lightning skills, and then you're gonna have an Iceblade occasionally chipping away at an enemy. So that'll be a 15% damage buff on the enemies that are getting hit by it. But you're always gonna have that 10% because the Arc Lash and the Firebolt enchant. We take that because it buffs our non-fizz damage, and it lets us round out our all resist so that we can cap. Then we go up here and we path and we grab this non-fizz of damage to elites. So one way that we are stacking in this build, we're stacking a lot of non-physical, and we're stacking a lot of lightning damage. And we're stacking some Vuln damage, because Paingorger's Mark really likes lightning damage, damage with burning, vulnerable. It really likes things that can apply to the people marked. If the enemies that are marked are burning and vulnerable, then both of those will increase the damage that the Paingorger's Mark does. And then every time you add a little bit more lightning damage, in the tooltip here, like I'll show you. So right now, see it says 36077. Let me take out the enchanter glyph, and you'll see what it goes to. So it went from 36077 to 31475. So that was about a 20% increase, 18% increase. So Enchanter's really strong on this build just because of how much it buffs that. So we're going to put this back in. Let's slot back in our Shaco so I don't forget and run a whole dungeon without it. Let's go back into our Paragon and we're going to keep moving. Next board is Burning Instinct. We're going to take Destruction. Now Destruction doesn't really benefit the people Paingorger's Mark, but what it does benefit, it's a per enemy thing as well. So when you group up a bunch of enemies and you hit them 5 or 6 times, you will crit all the enemies, and then they'll all be taking 12% more damage from your basics and from the Paingorger's Mark, because it's a debuff to them. We're trying to debuff the enemies as much as we can so that we can scale up the Paingorgers. We take this damage to burning, DR burning, and then we ended up going up here and we grab a bunch of damage to elites and damage to burning. I found this more valuable. We could get more valuable out of here than pathing down here, these 6 points, and then taking these to get this non-fizz. Got more raw stats this way. Next, we're going to path into Frigid Fate, and we take this vulnerable damage, and it gives us a little bit of Vuln DR, which is pretty nice. If you don't want all this stuff up here and you want to be tankier, what you can do is path down here and grab this, and then path out this way. And then simply what you do is you delete these 5 nodes, and you would shove the 7th board down here. There's a lot of ways to redo a board and path out for different preferences. So as I said before, we get 65 in Enchanter for 85.8 non-fizz. We have a maxed out Frigid Fate, which I love to see. So that's 30% damage to vulnerable enemies. That's going to scale with our Paingorgers. Next, we take 39 points in Flame Feeder. Some of these glyphs I don't max out because I was doing the math, I found I could get more value by taking like 16 damage to elites as opposed to spending 2 points to get another 10% burning damage, 6% more, and it helps with a single target. We grab this lightning damage just to buff the raw stats of Arc Lash, Flame Feeder, damage to burning, and 10% increased direct damage to burning enemies. And we go up here, and we take this non-fizz, helps elevate all our all resists and finish those out. And then we take charged. Charge is really going to shine when you're in unstable currents during a boss burn and stuff. And then in the dungeon you don't need it as much. And then lastly, we're going to take Exploit. We take a lot of points in Exploit. We take 39. We really want to stack up that vulnerable damage. And we're going to get dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases our damage by 1.1x. And I believe that is going to scale up the Arc Lash damage, because all the damage that we're exerting is going to do 1.1x damage. So that's the board. Nothing too crazy. Just the standard little 7 board. Don't have to take any mana nodes. So it ends up getting really comfy with how much extra additive I can take and whatnot. Let's go into the gear. So I have Shaco. Shaco matters a lot, because let's see what it is. So right now it's at 48,123. If we get rid of the 4 points, it's 36,077. That was a 33% increase just from Shaco. And then you combine that with Genesis. You combine that with Evernight for another 4 ranks. It's probably going to give you another 24% damage, because there's a little bit of diminishing returns. Now that I have my Shaco back on, I'm going to take that out, max out my TP. Next, we're going to take Raiment. The Raiment stuns are really nice for clumping. You are going to get stuck in enemies a little bit. You just kind of got to move out of the way or Flame Shield. The Raiment stun, the teleport damage itself will proc it, as with the Firebolt enchant. So it's really nice for just clumping up mobs and then slashing them and they just explode. Obviously, you have to take Paingorgers. It's the crux of the build. Farmed and Beast in the Ice. Good luck. They're kind of hard to get. I got a good roll on the 190%, but my basic skill damage is really low, so we're going to be looking for another one. Once I got Shaco, I dropped to Balts. So here's what I recommend if you're up for it. If you don't have Shaco, I'd slot to Balts for the 40% damage, because as we saw, the Harlequin Crust was adding 33, so they're about equivalent. So you can slot to Balts, and you can slot a Disobedience Helmet. And I run Disobedience because I alternate between Flickersteps and Asus. I do not like Juggernaut on Asus, because the whole point of Asus is to permanently be evading and getting the crit chance. So Juggernaut and Asus don't fly. They weren't meant to be ran together. The only time you should ever run Juggernaut, in my opinion, unless you just want brain dead farming, is when you're running boots with attacks reduced evade cooldowns, because it basically mitigates the 7-second cooldown that the Juggernaut from its penalty. So we just have a triple DR, total armor. I would definitely have total armor and damage to close on here, and then you can have damage reduction and then DR burning. I just took what I could get with DR distant. Next we have our Asus boots. As I've said 1,000 times, Asus and Flickers are pretty interchangeable. So that's really nice. You get about 38-40% crit chance from Asus, and then maybe upwards of 50 when you kill an elite. So that's really nice. This build does run a dagger. A wand's okay because we have some points in static discharge, but you're really going to want a dagger. And the key thing here is int all stats, because those both scale the Arc Lash damage in the tooltip. And you're going to want the basic skill damage, because that buffs it up too. It's a really big roll. And then next, I take Vulnerable, just because everything's vulnerable, and then it affects all the enemies that are away from me. That's why I don't take damage too close in this build. That's why I don't have Territorial. I'm looking for like things that buff up the Gorger's damage. Next we have our Storm Swell Focus. It's going to have basic skill attack speed, basic skill damage, and then you're really going to want crit chance and cooldown reduction. I just simply don't have one yet, so I have DR burning and cooldown, and the build still runs fine. It's a little tankier. Next, this is the first perfect ring I've ever got. This is the exact ring that you want. You want adaptability on it with max life, lightning, vulnerable, and critical strike damage. Vulnerable and lightning are really strong on this. Lightning damage is huge. Next, we take Tal Rasha. This is going to give us a bunch of non-fizz, which helps. Resource gen's wasted, but we're really in this for the 45% damage. You can't really run Starless on this build because you're not spending mana unless you wanted to slot something like Chain Lightning in to combo with it. So next, then we have an amulet with the important thing here is the 3 ranks conjuration and the cooldown reduction. In this build, because I don't run Juggernaut, I take total armor, and then I have 3 ranks conj, cooldown, and movement speed. This is just how I build it. If you're dead set on running flickers, what you can do is you would remove the total armor and you would remove the total armor for something like close DR or burning DR because you have Juggernaut. So Juggernaut in 1 armor roll, you're going to cap out. I explain a lot of this stuff in the build planner itself. So let's get straight into a dungeon. And before I do that, I'll go over the aspects again. So we have Disobedience, and then our attack speed one's here because we want to be slashing a ton, and I did notice a huge difference between not having Rapid and Ancient Flame and just having one of them. It was pretty crazy. So you're either going to want Rapid or Ancient Flame on the amulet. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. Just pick one. And then you're going to want Storm Swell because that's our biggest multi. 30% damage to vulnerable with a barrier. And then we are going to want adaptability. So what does suck about adaptability is this doesn't buff our Paingorger's damage. So if you really want more Paingorger's damage, you can take Conceited over here, or even Control. Your boss damage is going to suffer, but with Control, but with Conceited, your boss damage is going to go up. I haven't really done the math, and I can't really tell. But 80% damage just for my main basic skill hit is pretty huge, so I take it. And then, yeah, we round out with Asus Ferocity. Let's get into a dungeon. Let's do, not Avenger. Blood Blister. You know my feeling about Blood Blister. Armor Breakers. Resistance Breaker looks dope. Let's do that one. Alright, so this is a vault, so I will be running flickers. All those stipulations I said about between Flicker and Asus, whatever you're more geared towards running, I'm going to discuss in the planner. Because it was kind of hard to remember it all, even for me. There's just so many if-thens. I just kind of structure it in a way that you can seamlessly transition to both. And if that's your thing, we're just going to do no loot. I've got enough loot. So we got permanent UC uptime. Just absolutely shredding through. See if we can get an event. Nope. And we're out of here. Flickersteps are definitely the play for vaults. I like Asus for dungeons because they tend to be a bit bigger, less dense. And because we have flickers, I'm going to make a quick swap. Once I get a flame shield, I'm going to swap to chargeable enchant. It went off? Okay. My problem with flickers is these transition rooms are just so slow. But every time we stun an enemy, we're getting a bunch of charge bolts out. Those are proc firebolt enchant, so it's pretty nice. Everything gets burning. Because there are no bosses besides Son of Malphus, I honestly don't know if you're going to be able to kill Son of Malphus with this build. I haven't ran into one yet. Might not have enough DR for it. So if you do want to be more tanky, definitely you can drop total armor off the amulet, and you can just run an armor potion all the time. And you can take close DR on the amulet. Definitely what I would do if I was running flickers, because I would just be running Juggernaut. I was running strictly flickers. But half this game is Helltides for rolling gear, so I don't permanently run flickers. Hopefully we can see some decent Conj Mastery scaling. It's just not dense enough. After all this, I'll take it into Kyovashad. We'll go smash some bosses. You can kind of see where the testing went down and how I arrived to where I got to with the build. Okay, we had 6 out there. And this is without Iceblade Enchant. You'd get more with Iceblade Enchant. But Flickers is pretty good. So with about 6 out, we had 36% damage. And every time that you do spam your Arc Lash, that's going to spawn a random shock skill. So that's really nice. Let's try and get our UC back. Just keep evading around. And basically insta-killing everything that spawns. And yeah, just got smashed. We're gonna grab these for these Shatter Stones. Let's max out some random glyph. Let's open all these. Pick up what we can. And go right into another dungeon. We got a little homie. What's going on, guy? Thanks. Thanks, champ. Alright, let's go to Gate Hall. Just gonna go straight into another dungeon. So now that we're going into a standard dungeon, I'm gonna take off Flickers. And what that means is then I switch my enchantment to real simple Iceblade enchant. No cost, no frills, no nothing. Let's find a good one. Deserted Underpass. Blood Blister. Let's see. Let's see. Pretty notorious, but I got the movement speed now so I can get to him. Even at just like 42% crit without Asus, build still smashing through. As you saw in that last guy, there can be some single target issues, but it's beautiful thing is you just keep Asus on you, and you can always just swap to it, no problem. You could honestly just plan to run Flickers for dungeons, and then the second you have a boss, just swap to Asus for the crit chance. You get some pretty wild attack speed when Asus Ferocity does proc, and I found it more valuable than having something like an extra multi like Conceited. It's pretty crazy. Hopefully we get some density here. Whoa. Something poison enchant. But just absolutely smashing packs. 7 conjurations out. Oh, there we go. Now we got some density. So we don't have overflowing. Sometimes cooldowns can be a little spotty, but I think the attack speed of Ancient Plane makes it worth it. You get a nice Paingorger's mark there. And then everything's marked, and then you're just kind of nuking everything. You know, I really do miss Undying. It really helped just churn through all the poison. Give me that green shrine, baby. That good stuff. Single target's looking pretty good. Just absolutely smash that. I feel like I have pretty good spam on my cooldowns. There she is. Alright, now let's go into Kyovashad. Try and show this baby off. Bye! See you guys! Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Kyovashad and the training dummy, just showing it. We have Pummel here so that the Tempest value doesn't scale too hard, just for Evernight breaking and efficiency. This is just a showcase of the single target damage. See what kind of shit we can get going. So we're getting up to 9, 10, 11, and let's see, yeah, getting upwards of 200,000 damage per Arc Lash. 230, 245 I saw there. So let's back off, let's see what it is at base, just to see what sort of damage scaling we did get. Something's still ticking him. Firebolt is. And that's off. Let's see what it is at base. 140. Let's take off our little guy here. So we got up to like 249, 245, and it looks like at base, now that everything's cooled off, we're just sitting at 72,000. So it's pretty nice. That was like 4 times damage that we ended up getting scaled up to. So that's pretty good. All right, peace.